So I am very happy that we have James Burke with us today. Now, when I returned to Swiss, I think it must have been about 18 months ago, I was training a client of mine, and I'd been gone from into the UK for a couple of weeks where I was studying clinical hypnosis. And then when I come back, now this client is a PhD in physics. He has a very interesting startup company. And I felt kind of embarrassed when I said to him that I'd gone to study hypnosis. And then he said, if there's one thing that I need to do, I need to introduce you to my uncle, because you and him would click very, very well. And me and James got in touch with each other. We met each other in an Irish bar. After a couple of drinks, a good relationship formed, and we're still in touch now. And I'm really happy to bring James on, because you are certainly an interesting character, mate, I must say.
You sound like my wife. Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe it would be better if you introduce yourself, but just as a little background, you went from the corporate world as CEO to multinational companies to now being an executive coach that utilizes hypnosis and business sparring. Is that a good introduction to who you are, or would you like to go?
So I'm exactly. So I've been in the business world, been running various companies and been really heavily involved in business, and got out of corporate life. The corporate, for those who know, of you who know that, it's really can be a difficult place to be at times, and started executive coaching indeed. So I coach top manager. That's right. Right. And hypnosis comes in, Alex, but it's not, I don't do hypnosis. I try to understand where people have issues, and then we work on the issues. And at times hypnosis is the right thing to do.
Right. Because I guess there's no such thing as business problems. These are all personal problems that are manifested through into the business world. Or how do you see it?
I think that's, I think that's always right, I guess. What you then have is, if I know what it's like to be on a board. So I know how board people behave. So I have understanding of business people when they come up with issues. So I can imagine myself being in that position. And they realize that. And I think that's just something which helps them to open up, because I have the credibility, been there, done that kind of thing.
Right. So just for our listeners, I know you're like the most humble guy that I've met, and you hate to say who you've worked with and what you've kind of done, but just for a bit of a background for people, where was you CEO? What kind of business did you run? What kind of success have you had in the corporate world?
So I started in running an inorganic company in my early days, and then I moved on to run a company called Swiss in the Valley. That's where primary metal, aluminium, heavy industry. And then moved on. Alcan bought Swiss, so then I moved up in the ranks there. And I was very busy. Actually, my specialty became to fix companies. So I did a lot of restructuring of companies around the world, and then had leadership roles again in packaging areas. And so I know how to deal with, for example, the biggest I had to deal with 140 companies. So then you need certain structures which you need to have to put in place. And you realize what it's like when you get further away from the action, because you have such a big organization working for you.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And what kind of skills did it take you? Because I remember you saying about how you'd grown up and there were certain things that sort of you fulfilled through your corporate journey. What does it take to be someone that can be able to restructure 140 companies? I mean, that must take quite a lot of courage, I guess, as well as having a strategic mind in understanding how it works. I mean, what is that like?
I think it's interesting you say that. So the 140 companies, not that I restructured 140 companies, that was an operational role where they were reporting to me, and I was doing normal business, if everything is normal in business. And I did do a lot of restructurings in different parts of the world. And I think what it takes is, at least from my perspective, a lot of people think this is a terrible thing to do restructuring. But if you look at it as a gardener, you know, that you have a plant, it's kind of like something living. It's an organism, which you have a company and the people within it. And if you don't just go there with pesticides and knock everything down, if you try to understand which part is strong, which one can you help grow further, and which are parts which have come to a dead end and you have to take out. But you explain to people why you do what you're doing and they understand what you're doing. So you try to get people engaged in change. And I think that's part not just for business, but it's also in life. If you can come to the point, Alex, that you understand what your issue is, and if you can find peace with it, you know, if you understand what the issue is and you accept it and you don't get mad about it, you now come into a calm kind of position, which then allows you to do whatever you want to do.
So I have a friend that comes in to do this type of stuff, and a lot of people will look at him like he's the Grim Reaper when he walks into the place, because everyone knows, well, that means the fat's going to be trimmed and you know, people are going to end up either losing their jobs, getting promoted, or you know, something. There's going to be change. How did you develop this skill set, right? Like your ability to just kind of be able to diagnose an issue, right? I understand what's going on and say, if we plug the hole here or we do this there. How did you come across or actually start being able to do all this? How'd you develop it?
I think I developed it with the attitude that I know that I don't know. So, okay, now that I know that I don't know, it sounds like nothing, but I think it's a very important piece of knowledge which you have to develop for yourself. Once you understand you don't know, you have to go to people who do. So if you have a company which is not going very well, there are reasons for it. And you speak with the people to understand their perception of the reason. So you don't get a full truth, which is not, you know, which is something, a difficult word anyway, but you get views on what a situation looks like. And then based on this information, you try to gather facts, and then you come to a conclusion where the actual problem is. So now, as these people have been participating in understanding the problem, you help them accept and understand the problem. So for example, they have too much waste. They don't produce, you know, they don't produce the right amount of quality, or they have too much costs in some area. So you go and try to understand what the issue is. What you also do at the same time is there is an old-fashioned type of attitude to that. You know, if you have too much cost, you take people out. Well, in my view, this is a very inefficient way of looking at it. The way to look at it is, imagine every person creates value. Then the more people they have, the more value you have. But in management, you sometimes ask people to do stuff which does not have value, and therefore only creates cost. So it's our role, the management role, to understand where do we now pay people to do something which gives no return to the company. And you try to take, and that's what I call waste. You try to take out waste. And that's a bit a tricky piece of work, because you have to go into the depth and understand from the people where they have waste, help them understand how to eliminate that waste. And when you have that, indeed, you may have less hours which you need to work on. And these hours you take out. And after a while, that can mean that you take out people. But at the same time, I had 3 different types of savings for companies. One was eliminating waste, and that could lead to reduction of people. It did most of the time also reduce the reduction of people. Sometimes waste happened because they didn't have enough people. So if you have a big, huge piece of equipment which should be running at night and you don't have an electrician, you have to call him out of bed to drive for an hour to get there, then to try to start and fix it. It's much, much, much cheaper if you have an electrician there on the job. So you can save money by hiring people. And the third thing is by having waste in stuff which they in work, you know, they were using the too expensive material. You could do it with simpler material. So therefore you need to go and speak with the people and say, you have this material, what do you need it for? Does it need to have this? Does it need to have that? And then you find out, no, it doesn't. And then you can get to cheaper material.
So how did you get started? Once you get a reputation to do this and you're a problem solver and you fix these things, like people, you know, jobs beget jobs, right? It just becomes easier and word of mouth travels. How did you start this at first? Because this is a tough gig to say, hey, let me restructure your company.
Well, I think my passion was always trying to make things better. So I was trying to understand, why do we do it the way we do it? What's the reason behind it? What is the fundamental behind why we do what we're doing? And when you start asking these questions, you find out that there's some very, what I would call dogmatic ways. We've always done it that way. That's the way how to do it. But there's no, you know, there's no real logic behind it. So if you then go and figure out, but that actually doesn't make sense. So, and that's actually, I find this a fascinating thing, you know. And you ask me, how did you start doing that? I started doing it by doing it. And then people saw the results and people didn't get hurt by it, you know, because if you can go to a company and if you can improve a company that they eliminate waste, you automatically increase your competitiveness. If you increase your competitiveness, you don't have to go through these struggles. You don't have to.
So it's real funny when you say you just don't understand why people think that way. You literally just described sport. Every kind of dysfunction you could possibly have in any kind of company, sport possesses all of them 10x. And it's, you know, we've done it. This is how we've always done things. Now, who hires you? Does a CEO hire you? Does an owner hire you? Does the board hire you? And how do you combat, you know, if let's say the leaky faucet is the CEO, how do you go about doing all these things?
So let me just come to the latest point. If the issue is the CEO, so if the issue is the CEO, I know it sounds a bit simple, but you have to remove the CEO. So it's why is that? If for example you realize that the CEO, for whatever reason, and that gets more into the psychological part, he can be very scared about many things, which makes him very defensive. So people come to him with proposals, and because he doesn't know what to do, he says no to everything. So he can't lead change. And no matter what you do, if you want to progress an organization, no matter what, you have to be leading change, and you have to help people feel comfortable with going through change, because that's the only constant we have. The change is happening. As a matter of fact, in today's days, it's getting it's getting faster and faster and faster.
James, and with the skill of understanding people and trying to, you know, build these strategies, is this intuitive based, or is this what you've learned from books, or how have you developed this?
So the way you can develop it is, number one, what I do today is coaching. So I don't do the big restructurings anymore myself, but I may coach or in sparring help CEOs who are in this situation to do it in a successful way. And sorry, Alex, I just got sidetracked. What was the question again?
No worries at all, mate. So are these the skills that you're implementing within a company? Are they right, intuitively based? Is this something that you've always been good at, like reading people and trying to understand strategic change? Or is this something that you learned in a book, or is it a combination of both?
I think there's a combination of both, but I think the starting point is, I don't think you can, it may sound a bit strange, but you can't lead people through difficult times if you don't like people. You need to love people. Because if you have a feeling for that, then you know that even if somebody does something stupid, and that's what I tell, you know, when companies complain to me and say, oh, our people are this, our people are that, our people are the other, and I say, what's the percentage of people you have in your company who come in with the intention to do something bad? What would you guess? And then after a while, we come to the point it's probably nobody, or maybe one person if he's a bit pissed off about something, but actually nobody. So when you come to that conclusion, you understand people don't go and do a job and want to do it badly. So if they do it badly, you have to understand why. And that's where the first thing is to have an understanding that people don't do anything under normal circumstances in companies and business I'm talking about badly because they want to do it badly. When they do it, there is a reason. And the reason can be a multitude of personal reasons or external factors, but you need to understand what that is. The second thing is there is something called the Toyota production system. So it's Lean Six Sigma, and which is fantastic, which I could really recommend you to have a look at, because I think even for sport, you could get it. Because when people ask me, what do you think Lean is? It's actually common sense applied in a systematic way. That's it. Not more, not less. And so it sounds very friendly, but it's very tough to do. It's difficult to do. So I think it's a combination of appreciating people, understand that they don't do anything bad, and then having techniques to address issues and help them address their issues. Because, you know, when you're there, you don't do their work, they do their work. So you have to help them understand, how do I know if I do something it's right?
The Lean Six Sigma, I mean, this was one of the things that I'll never forget that you'd mentioned about with this Toyota production line. Could you shed light on that? What is that?
Yeah. So there are two things. It's the word lean is an MIT expression from a young guy from MIT who studied in the Toyota production system, and they didn't know how to call it, so he came up with the word. So the word is actually meaningless. It doesn't matter what you call it. It really doesn't matter. And so what you get, you have there a pillar, exactly. Okay, so this is from the Toyota production system, and you can get very technical about it, but the basic idea is we need to understand what our customer wants, and then we need to find an efficient way to go there. So everything is aligned in two ways. So if you have the Jidoka pillar, which we see there, that is more related to the quality side, and then there is the part related to the supply side. But there below on this temple, which you've been showing, there are pillars for the basis. And these pillars are the actually tough ones and the reason why people are able to make it work or not. So if you look at in this example here of the description of it, you have stability. So you need to get stability first. So I could imagine that in sports, if in sports, I'll try to give you an example. You can have in a production line, you can have one team who works the morning shift who has significantly less waste than other shifts because they work different. Does that make any sense? Okay, so now what you do is you can say, actually, it's a pity. We don't want to live with this. We would like to learn what the other guys do better. So then you can go and observe what they do, and you can try to learn from them. So the first problem you now have, if you have to bring this to shift 2 and to shift 3, they will have the issue of the not invented here syndrome. So it gets very quickly to change management to psychology, right? So now what you need to do is you have to find ways that they actually discover it themselves. So you see the word there, Kaizen. Kaizen blitzes are very short projects which you do, and you can help them. You can tell them, we need to bring the waste down. What are your ideas? And then bring in some of the ideas from the others. But they have to, and it's okay, they have to understand and develop it themselves. You have to leave them the pride, you know, it's understandable. Yeah.
You said it's the not invented here syndrome? Yeah. I like that. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's a very, very typical obstacle. You know, for, you know, to share something idea you have is fine, but the person who absorbs it has a much bigger hurdle to take than the person who says it. So now what you can try to do, you can say, okay, if I want to teach these guys to do something, how can I help them think? And that's not a trick, but help them figure out themselves. This is actually something I also helped invent. You know, I have a move I need to do. Some are optimal, some are suboptimal. And I'm trying to analyze now what is the optimal move. And I can, and you can go and look at how different people make these moves. And then you can try and pick out something for yourself. So that's step 1. But the even more tricky step is, now that you know how you need to do it, you need to do it. And that's what we call standardize. And standardizing something which you learned is important, because if you don't do that, you always fall back into the old habits. So you have to standardize it. And if you want it to standardize, and that's where European and American companies have big problems, they do not invest sufficient time to follow up on people constantly. In industry, it's on an hourly basis. You have to follow up. And if me, James, I am building triangles, and I'm not doing it the new way, I should get feedback right away, ideally within the minute, telling me, James, why are you doing the old way? Oh, that's right. And then it will adjust. And as long as this is coming back and back again, I get rewarded to make the change. If you just give me to make the change and I fall back and nobody corrects me, I have no win and no penalty for not doing it the way. So the plan, what we call plan, do, check, act, is so critical and important. And one of the big reasons why a lot of companies are struggling to make improvements in their organizations.
So in a situation like that, will you actually assign someone to sit there and constantly monitor and regulate?
This is actually the job of the supervisor. And the supervisor, so when people said lean in organizations, they said lean is without people or with fewer people. That's not true. Lean is effective. So you have the amount of people there which is effective. So if you have a supervisor, he will pass by, let's see, we all three are in a line working. So he should pass by on a regular basis, whatever makes sense. So if we are in sales, I don't need somebody to pass by every 5 minutes. But if I'm changing in production from a critical part 1 to critical part 2, I think the observation and the feedback has to happen quickly. Now, the next thing which is important is, if we don't follow the standard, remember what I just mentioned before, and I think you guys agreed, it's not because we have bad intentions, because we're in a rush, we fall back. So it's really important that the supervisor, he doesn't come and say, what the hell is this? No, he says, you're not following the standard. Anything I need to do to help you to make it work? And then often, you know, it's no, I, James, I know, I just fell back. I forgot. Thanks for reminding me. And then I continue. So the follow-up is not necessarily a critic. It's just checking if we are doing what we intended to do. So and I don't know how that would fit in sports, but what is a key thing in lean management, if you do it right, is nice to the person. What's your problem, James? Tough on the objective. Pitiless on the objective. So we can't afford that you only have 10 triangles, we need 15. So I understand you have an issue. Let's see how we can help you get there. But there's no question if we're going to have 15 triangles or not. No question. Does that help?
Your mic's off, Mike.
Yes, it does. It's funny you said tough to the cause, kind to the people, but tough to the cause. I read a book on negotiations, and that was one of the first things that they were teaching in regards to negotiations. You want to be kind to people because it's not their fault. It's the cause. Like, so I love that. That's great. Yeah, that's awesome that it transferred over to this.
Yeah. So if you go back and you understand, it's not less, people don't do something because they have bad intentions. Their mind is maybe they're not focused. Maybe they have problems at home. Maybe they have, there's a number of reasons for that. So they need to understand that you as their boss are on their side, but you do not give up on the objective.
Yeah. So it's like a temporary micromanagement just so it yields the adaptation. And then that way, okay, continue course and speed.
So what you do is you don't necessarily, to avoid micromanagement, in most cases, when they need to make improvements, you don't tell them how to make improvements. Mm-hmm. You say, we three would have to sit together and say, we now need to make 15 triangles an hour. So how do we do that? So far we did 10. And then we learn different techniques in lean, which are simple tools to understand root and effect, cause and effect diagrams, and so on. What is slowing us down? So for example, we have a machine which we always need to pull out something which is not coming out easy. So we say we lose time there, we lose time there, we lose time there, we lose time there. So we then go back to our boss and say, this machine needs to work different. We need to have this. If we would have the table higher up, that we wouldn't have to go and bend up and down, we could move things across quicker. If your table and my table come closer, I can just pass it on. Sometimes maybe there is a job on the triangle which is easier for me to do than for you, or the other way around. So we balance work. So we get into a tact. So it's not that we tell you do this, you do that, you do the other. We tell people what is the objective. Tell me how you want to do it. Tell me if you need something.
So on that first pillar, it said stability. What did it mean by stability? What does that mean?
So in stability we talked about improvements, right? So you can't build improvement on improvement on improvement on improvement. If you do that, the whole thing gets shaky. So you need to make an improvement stabilize. So people need to understand, okay, this is how I need to do this specific thing. I feel comfortable with it. And then they will discover by themselves, actually, now that I see this way, we could make here an adjustment or here an adjustment. Then you make the improvement and you stabilize. Okay.
Yeah.
We're laughing because this is a huge thing that we always talk about. So say if an athlete will say get a PB in something rather than chase another PB straight away, we will always more or less stop the session so that it can stabilize and actualize, and then you can reproduce it. So that's why we're laughing, because there's a lot about this that you can relate in terms of coaching people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Our I guess our system, our whole coaching system is based off of stimulate, adapt. And there's no time for stabilization or actualization of anything. And but it's across these are universal concepts. This is why, you know, interviewing guys like you it's so attractive to me and Brooker, because I mean, it's the same concept throughout all different walks of life, regardless of what you're doing.
Yeah. And I think you know, that the point is because we're dealing with Homo sapiens. So if we like it or not, we have the emotional system and we have the cognitive system. And unfortunately, the emotional system is the one which dictates our decision.
Yeah.
And we have to live with it. And if you bring in systems, which I call not human compatible, that's when I have discussions with people. If you bring in non-human compatible systems, you're going to fail. You know, it won't work.
So I am very, very big with logic. Things need to, everything has to add up, and I'm very black and white with things. Yeah. And that's a very big downfall to me with communication with regular people. Logic is good in theory, but just horrible in reality, because no one else utilizes logic. Yeah. No one, if someone else is black and white and I speak to them like this, we get along great. But if I'm logical and they're emotional, then it doesn't matter what I say. They're just going to continue. I'm going to speak Chinese and they're going to speak French, and we're never going to speak the same language.
Yeah,
ever.
Exactly. And that's where you'll have to, you have to learn to speak the other language. There's no other way. Mm-hmm. You know, the reason when people get emotional and are not logical is because what I found in business is when you have come to tough decisions, we have to give up this line. Then everybody agrees. And then they say, James, but we just invested 150 million in this line. So we just developed the logic why we need to close it. And now they come back and say, but James, we invested 150 million. From the conclusion, from the decision point of view, should you close or not close a line, the 150 million are irrelevant. Yeah. So what the point is about, if they then come up with that, they say, at the beginning, I had difficulties with this, but then I knew if he brings this up, it's not logical, as you would say, rightly say. However, it is his logic. Now, what I learned to do is I started asking him, okay, we agree that this has nothing to do with the decision, but it still bothers you. And he says, James, how am I going to explain this? So when you get there, now you can start working how to explain it. And then things fall back into place. So people have difficulties at times, indeed, when we speak logical, to argue logical. So it comes with an emotional statement, but keep in mind, I don't know any Homo sapiens who reacts unlogical from their perspective.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that person's perspective was, it was the $150 million investment was my idea. That's
yeah, exactly.
And now my job's on the line.
yeah. But now what you do is with exactly that case, you go and build a story why at that time when the decision was taken, it made absolute sense. So you help them there. It's an absolute logical thing. It was exactly the same logical thing to put it in place, but you know, things changed. Life came in between, changes, you know, things happen.
James, what's the underlying fear that would stop that person then following through? I mean, say that they're with the decision maker for the $150 million investment. What's the fear that's driving that to stop the change from progressing? What's the underlying cause of that?
So the underlying, so let's take the example of this 150 million. It could be, how on earth am I going to explain that to my boss? Because my boss might not listen. or he doesn't know himself how to argue with his boss. So when he then has to go to the board. So what then is important is that you help them come up with a story. By a story, I don't mean not the truth. I mean the truth, but you come up to with an explanation story, why the original investment was done, who was. You come up with that, and then you help them build a story and a visual. And it has to be in such a way that his boss's boss can use it himself when he goes upstairs. So you have to help people who are the decision makers. You have to make it easy for the decision makers to understand why what you're suggesting is a good idea. And that's maybe a different type of view. So you're not saying, this is what happened, boss, and you give it to him. No. You think, how is he going to react to that? What is going to be his problem? How is he going to bring this upstairs? And based on that, you build a story. So you help him, and that will help you at the end of the day.
So now you solve all these problems. You're solving logical problems. You're solving emotional problems. You're solving, or you're helping people figure these things out.
Yep.
How does hypnosis come into play?
Yeah. So imagine, we had this conversation. You can see my logic, and so when some of my people who knew me from back then, when they read that I was doing hypnosis, they said, "What? James, hypnosis?" They couldn't believe it. So the reason for hypnosis is there's a lot of stuff which when we're speaking now, we're speaking on the cognitive level. And if you have an issue or a person has an issue and you work with them through the issue, you can tell them, for example, they treat other people badly. And they find out after a while that they understand why, because they feel insecure. So you help them to get over the insecurity and so on, which then doesn't make them afraid anymore, so they can be more. So they now know how to deal with this. So they go and they start working on it because they intellectually understand why this is their pattern. And then they realize, I can't do it. And why can't they do it? Because their system is still scared, which is the unconscious, subconscious, but let's leave it at the unconscious for a moment. So now you have to go and address the unconscious. And there are a couple of ways of doing that. If you do this in speech therapy, you have to go what we say into slow motion. And that means, so you now imagine you're facing somebody where you're always getting very aggressive. So imagine you're going towards the door where the other guy is behind. Can you see yourself? What do you feel now? So now you're putting your hand towards the handle, and you're getting on the handle, and so you have to go into slow motion. And this takes such a long time until you can get to the point. And that drove me nuts. Because my point is, I would like to help people in a short time, not in a long time. And I realized with hypnosis, I was able to go there, what would take, 5, 6, 7, 8 sessions. I could go there faster, more effective in one session. So that's the point. So if you ask me why hypnosis, it's faster and more effective. That's the answer. So
who would you utilize hypnosis with? The people you were working with within the company?
Yeah, so it would be, believe it or not, but there are CEOs, CFOs, name it, I do hypnosis with.
How did you get? Sorry, James, go ahead. No. There was the delay. Go ahead. if you can remember your train of thought.
So there was the you know, when you come back to the point that people understand on the cognitive level what they would like to do and they can't do it, they come to realize, and I think this just takes it a bit, this is going to be difficult if we go into the unconscious part, digging down. It's a fascinating thing, by the way. It's fascinating because it's the dictator of how we behave. And what you do in hypnosis, what you try to have the brain take a rest, the cognitive part take a rest, and you work with the unconscious. And therefore you get answers which the brain will never permit. Because it comes from the stomach up to the brain, and especially for children, it's easy, but for grown-ups, it goes to 384 filters, you know, until something comes out of this mouth. And then you know, when it comes out of the mouth, it's worded in a way that you don't look bad, that it's politically correct, and so on and so forth. And it's just crap, you know, because that's not what the problem of the system is. And that's what you get in hypnosis. You can go much more to the point. There's no defensive levels coming up. And of course, you can only do that with somebody when you have really trust, of course.
James, what are some of the results that you've had with hypnosis? I mean, I know you've mentioned to me a couple different experiences you'd had, in particular once, I believe, when you come across a car crash, and other ones like that. Would you share some of the stories that you've been able, like the effectiveness of what you've been able to do with hypnosis?
Yeah, so I think there are the easier parts and the more difficult parts. So there's the easier part. For example, this is not my normal field of work, but sometimes I have clients, and the clients then says, okay, James, I spoke to my wife about it, and she wants to see you. So then things come up, for example, and I think it's just a good example to which makes it, it's a simple example that makes it more clear, of phobias, different types of phobias. And this woman had phobia of spiders. Now, when people have phobias, or when they're really scared, I think it's a really good example, because you can demonstrate to people that they understand, you know, that the spider, and I'm not talking about spiders, I'm talking about spiders, right? Small ones. You can, if you tell a person, okay, if this spider opened its mouth, how big do you think the teeth are there? You know, of course, you know, there's no actual physical threat from a spider. These people, if they have a real big phobia against spiders, they feel seeing a spider as life-threatening. So they can have panic attacks on that. So now what you do is, there is no logical level where, so first what you do is, on the cognitive level, you come to an agreement with the client why the spider is actually not dangerous to you. And then the next thing is to comfort the system. And in hypnosis, you can go there and you can comfort the system, which means that when a person after such a session can have a spider walking over her hand and just absorb it, just looking at it, no more panics. That's an example. And then there are other examples on behaviors. And that's when people have what we call somatic markers, where they come into a certain situation where they behave badly. And when they have that, they have a feeling that their throat is getting tight and so on and so forth. And you use that to go back to when this originally happened. And a lot of these things happen in childhood, in the childhood phase. So for example, there was a woman who didn't trust anybody in business. And in business, when you're in a leading position and you don't trust people, this is an issue. And it came out that she said, I couldn't even trust my mother. And we had in the hypnosis, when we went back in time, she was in a department store. That was then the situation that came up under hypnosis. She was in a department store. And in this department store, she was there with her mother, and a big guy was coming towards her. And she asked her mother, help me, lift me up. And her mother didn't lift her up. And so she ran down the stairs. And to her, the conclusion was, you can't trust your mother. So if you can't trust your mother, who can you trust? Nobody. So what you can do in hypnosis now, you can freeze the scene and say, let's just stay there. Let's put a bit more light there. What is your mother doing? What's the situation? And she found out that her mother's arms were packed with bags. And she was speaking to her and she said, so what is she saying? And she's saying, hold on, I just have to put the bags down. But at that time, little girl was so scared that she didn't recognize that, and she was just running away, leaving her this conclusion and this, what we call trauma. And then after that, when we were able to resolve this, so the trust didn't come back like that, but after 6 months, 7 months, she was able to trust certain people. Then she got good experience with that, and then she came into a situation where she was able to trust people. Yeah, we all have these. It's actually a learning. It's our system learns something and tries to protect ourselves, and we just have to unlearn that learning.
Mm-hmm. So, go on, Mike.
No. Go. Do you think that it's important to understand where it comes from? See, this is where I actually, it doesn't even bother me to identify from where it originates. That's all that matters is that is there, right? So if I have anxiety because I witnessed something, it doesn't matter what I witnessed. All that matters is that I'm yielding the adaptation. My response to this specific stimuli is anxiety. I don't even think the origin is even important. Is it?
Yes, no. So let's go to the yes first. Yes, it's important because when this, whatever it is, it is of no importance what happened, none. But what is important, it was perceived as life-threatening. That's what's important. And it happened at a certain stage. So if you wish, we have these little gnomes in ourselves who write these programs to protect ourselves, okay? So they wrote a program. If it happens to me, and the example I give is, a guy kicks the ball and it knocks down the flowers of the neighbor. So the neighbor comes out with a big red face, unhappy and pissed. And the boy gets so scared. So the point is not if this was a ball, if he kicked in the window, that doesn't matter. But what matters is that at that very specific point in time, this program got registered. So the system is trying to protect him. So every time he goes into a situation where the system thinks this could be dangerous, it starts stopping it. So it teaches the boy, avoid the situation, and if you can't avoid it, get aggressive. So that's the fight and flight thing. And when you work with hypnosis, you want to go there and help the boy understand that this situation wasn't as bad as it was perceived. So you try to unlearn the system. That's what you're trying to do. You unlearn the system, and therefore you eliminate the program. But now you have to go, that's in the so-called regression. So now you have to go back to the next time when it happened in life, the next time, the next time, the next time. So that's why something like this can take 4 hours. And then you eliminate all the reasons for this program. The program is gone. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Yes. It's, you know, I constantly think, because I have young clients, I have older clients that all deal with, you know, anxiety, depression, and all these things. And a lot of it is, well, it's not so much you're stuck with this forever. That's one thing that they say about anxiety. It's like, well, you have anxiety forever.
No,
and
it's
not true.
Well, you don't have to live with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you can get rid of anxiety and you can mitigate the symptoms significantly. So one of the things that they tend to go towards with this is the origin. And I just don't, even going back, like, hey, when you were here, you experienced this. And when you're here, you experienced this. And it almost doesn't even matter to me even then, because even working backwards, all that matters is what's happening now, how I'm feeling now, and how I want to feel forward. And these are the responses that we deal with. The learned program, the bad reps performed prior, it's irrelevant, because what happened. Like when we have guys that are injured, we know how they got injured, right? But it doesn't matter how they got injured. A lot of the times, let's say for like a torn ACL, the non-contact, right? It doesn't matter how they got injured with the non-contact. All that matters is what's happening right now that the person, you know, we're rehabbing everything. What's happening right now? What are the symptoms that we're displaying at this moment? Where you tore it doesn't necessarily seem to be the issue, but it's now. How are we going to rehab you as best as you can? And when you go onto the field, what are the things that we are currently seeing? Whereas when it happened in the past, I don't know.
So I would like to pull that tooth. There is something which you may have heard of post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay. One of the reasons why this happens, to put it in a very brief and into a nutshell, is something happened which the brain couldn't deal with. So it can't make sense out of it. So as long as it can't make sense out of it, it goes in loops and loops and loops, repeats. It tries to understand, tries to learn, tries to understand, tries to learn, and it gets nowhere. What you do to resolve it is you help the people to live through the situation, not just for fun or for whatever. You want to give the brain a chance to find a logic what happened. When it gets the logic, it can let go of it. It can start digesting it. So to give you, I forgot that I said, does it matter what happened in the past or not? And I said, yes, no. Then I went to the no side first, why it's important. But let's take somebody of fear of heights. Example. So fear of heights, one of the indications is what you can do if you don't want to go and eliminate the root cause of it. You can go and expose yourself to heights. But what you're doing, actually, if we look at it technically, what you're doing, you're helping the system to unlearn. Again, you're helping the system to unlearn. So when somebody falls off the horse, go back on the horse and do it again. You want to unlearn. So if you have issues where you learn something which is bothering you, which happened, let's say, a week or two ago, this is not the same kind of trauma that I was speaking about, which happens in young age and which dictates your life, if you like it or not. Then you have to go back. If something happens, you talk about sports 2 weeks ago, the key thing is to understand what happened and say, this can happen. Okay, we're playing sport. This can happen. What can I do to mitigate? If you don't, if whatever you have, if you don't accept it, understand and accept it, and this doesn't have to be a crying session, whatever. This is a very simple fact-based thing, but to make people feel relaxed. Feel relaxed about what happened. These things happen. Find peace with it, and then we can move on. So if their system reacts badly, that they can suddenly not do something, if that is the case, then you have to take time, and that's logic, Frank. Logic, you know, you're after. If when you speak with them on the cognitive level and that's not sufficient, you have to face the part which is the program, a mini program which has been written, and just accept it. Look at that happy face.
I mean, it makes one of the ways that I like to sort of try and understand, because this is one of the interesting things, and I remember talking to you about this the first time we met, is from the clinical side that I'd learned, there was a lot of talk about is regression and stuff like this. How effective is this? Because it's hard to measure. And if you look at certain things now to do with typical neuroscience, they say, well, memories are a bit shady and they cannot always be the way that they are. And I understand that maybe it doesn't need to be 100% fact, but it's the way that it's perceived, the memory that you're looking at. And what you was mentioning then in terms about heights and exposure therapy. And the good thing with hypnosis is that you can put the system into a place where it's controlled imagination. So you can basically do exposure therapy in the mind and sort of behavior rehearse it in a way that you can already put the building blocks into place that you can increase the confidence and self-efficacy of people. That I absolutely get. I mean, Mike, with what you were saying about, say, like, for example, a non-contact ACL. Okay, you get your guy, his ACL's busted. The context is still important, because it's like, how was it done? Was it a deceleration? Was it a cut? Was it you know, maybe not so much how do I even go into this better? More light shed on it makes sense, because is it a biomechanical issue, or is it an imbalance kind of issue or something like this? That helps to encourage the treatment protocol that comes out of it, right? Because there has to be some kind of level to learn from it. So I don't know, to wrap back around where I went in a bit of a circle there, to me, it seems like the brain struggles to know the difference between things that are real or imagined. Just like if you have a nightmare, you can wake up and have a lot of physiological symptoms to the images that are going on inside of your brain. So the thing that I am very interested in with hypnosis is that if you can get people to go into the sort of the dark where they're really scared, and you can go in there without getting this sort of autonomic nervous system response, you can start already putting the building blocks in place that they can then face it and then overcome it also in the reality, right? And then once they've, you know, got over their fear, it shouldn't really be coming up again. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes. I think there are two things. One is, to Mike's point, you know, it doesn't have to be. Oh, you'll like that, Mike. You'll like that. When I speak with people where they have ideas where this issue, where this issue was coming from, that created this program, and when we then go in hypnosis, we often don't even pass these places where they said that's where the issue was. Okay, we don't even get there. So I don't think it's important, and I don't think it's helpful to go and figure out and try to understand with a awake mind, where does this come from? Because we can't trust the brain. Full stop. You know, the brain is always giving us stories about what happened, and it's inventing permanently. So when you look at forensic psychology, you can see that when you interview people who have witnessed something, they will give you stories. And it's not that they have bad intentions by doing that, but their brain, they just saw something happening here, something happening there, and their brain has to build a logic between the two. That's what the brain is here for. And they will tell you the logic. They will not see what they've seen. They will tell you what their brain has set up. When you speak with people about experiences which they had in the past, and their narrative very often has been massively corrected than what has actually happened, because the brain tries to bring it into a better way than it actually happened. Yeah. So don't trust the brain.
Exactly. So our memories are false anyway. So why even go back? Like that's what I don't understand. I remember watching this interview when they were talking about, it might have been on Netflix, where they're talking about how memory works. And they interviewed this one woman and asked her, where were you on 9/11? And she told her, she goes, oh, I'll never forget it. It was this, this, and this. And then they said, no, actually, your mom wasn't even working in 9/11 during this time. And you completely made that up. That might've been someone else's experience. Like, oh my goodness. Yeah. You know, like our brain forgets so many different things, and then we just fill in the blanks ourselves. So it's like,
exactly, and fill in the blanks.
Yeah. So going back to those memories, it's like, well, why even bother? They're skewed anyway.
Okay, Mike, there is a syntax error in that statement. And it's that if you would do this awake, you would get exactly that. But when you do it in hypnosis, the whole thing is to get the brain out of the story. You just want to go to the real stuff, and you want to unlearn. So any way you can help unlearn somebody who understands it but can't do it, the reason is the system is stopping it because it learned something. Then you have to unlearn it. It's actually as simple as that. You know, we don't have to make a big story about it. It's how do we unlearn? And the problem, the big problem which I see is the unconscious influences us and the brain, but we can't go, speak back mentally. We can't think back and correct it. So if you take a chocolate and you form it and it looks like a really ugly dog shit, and you have to put it into your mouth, your whole system goes, no, it just doesn't want to do it. You've seen it's chocolate, but your system says, no. And that happens to us all the time. So we now need to convince the system, help the system to understand that. So first of all, we say, I understand you're trying to keep me safe. I understand what you're trying to do. But look, you see, this is the chocolate. You see, this is what happened. You see. So you need to unlearn the system that it doesn't stop you just from anything. But it doesn't argue with you. It doesn't say, I am now going to tell you not to eat because it looks like something dangerous. No, it just stops you. That's it. So we have this system in ourselves which makes up and does in many ways a good job, because we wouldn't be alive anymore probably, to protect us from all kinds of things. But in some cases, it gets very, very counterproductive. And in cases where it gets counterproductive, that's where you have to unlearn. So for example, I could imagine in sports, when you have an injury, the system says, not good, shouldn't happen again. So it's going to stop you to get into that environment again. So then it's you have to figure out, how can we help the system understand that it's still okay? Because I learned how to deal with this, I learned how to deal with that, so I can reduce the impact dramatically, for example.
Yeah. And as an example of that, like pain is PTSD, right? So any kind of limping, all those things associated with injuries, that's just PTSD. That's our brain telling us, well, we don't want to be in these positions. It's just going to prevent it. We replicate positions that we want them to be in order to increase the body's awareness for that position, to let them know that it's okay to be there. Mm-hmm. It's the same exact thing that you're discussing with the mind. We're going to get you there, mentally, emotionally, and say, hey, look, listen, you were here before, it hurt, but look where we are now. It's safe, right?
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. That makes absolute sense. So if you have it, so I just tell you this from my, I'm not a sportsman, but I do some fitness stuff. So when I have torn something and I can't squat, for example, because it hurts, then I can see that you take this position where you protect yourself, and then it takes a lot of energy to slowly get back to do it until the system realizes, okay, we're okay again. So that, I think, to your point, is a typical example of unlearning. And it's a typical example of learning. So what we should just be aware of, that some of these things have occurred very recently and they can be unlearned very quickly. Some of these things that have a lot to do with how we behave in general is older stuff. And then we just have to go back to where the older stuff happened to unlearn. But it's the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. The same thing. It's not complicated. It's not complicated. And I think if you guys can help people understand that when you have anxieties, when you have difficulties, when you're if you have, bad aspects of behaving badly and so on, if you could understand, you don't need to live with this. You don't need to. You can fix it. Because it really hurts me to see that, when people have headache, they go and get a pill, but they walk around emotionally with broken legs and it hurts every step they do and they do nothing about it. It's sad, actually.
Absolutely. Absolutely. James, if you've still got a bit of time, I would love to shift course a little bit, mate, because hypnosis, as you said, is only a little part of what you do, but your speciality is more to do with business side. Now, me and Mike are both in the private sector. You know quite a lot about me and my desires and my current setups and stuff like that. What do you see as being sort of the future of business? And say, like, for example, for younger guys like us that are self-employed, our business is basically ourselves. Okay. And we have a lot of coaches that listen to this podcast. So with the whole COVID era that we've just gone through, a lot of guys have not been working and probably want to have a bit more time to build up their own businesses or being self-employed or in this kind of way and not working in a professional setting. What sort of advice would you have for guys like that in terms about building up? I don't know. I don't really like the word personal brand, but in this kind of area, do you have some advice on that from your experience in business on what people can do to sort of get themselves going in this way?
So what I have been doing is, and what I still do is, apart from being executive coach, I also coach startups, and I do this pro bono, so without charging. And the reason I do that is because I think it's just something which I can pay back to society. I've been lucky in many ways. And so if I can do that, I think that's a good thing to do. And apart from that, I learn all the time. And it's fun. So I get what I say in my job, I get satisfaction dollars. I don't get cash. But if you can help a guy not running into a wall, that's a satisfaction, that there's a value to it, For business, if you're on your own in a business, I think the fundamental things probably are most of the time around, am I creating a value? And if I am creating a value for somebody, what is it worth? Because in the personal training part, I find that it would actually be so important. It's a bit like coaching. I've got so much benefit out of of coaching on how to do things. So I'm not a natural when it comes to physical movement. So I'm really happy when people can teach and tell me what to do and to avoid problems. So the question is, how can I position myself in a way that I can create value and that other people can see that value? So if you can, that's maybe a bit abstract, but if somebody really sees what they get from it, if you can help them see what they get from it, if you can make a link, for example, this is where you are, this is where you are now, and look, imagine with these capabilities which you have now, this will allow you to take the next step. Then the steps which can help people to make, you can also translate that into value. So if there's sports people, I guess, you know, there's always almost a capital. You can be now worth X instead of what you were worth before, so that they can see the value for them. It's not about doing something good or not good. Has to be seen by the person who receives it. And if you can manage that they see it, you win. And if you can't manage that they see it, you won't.
Sorry, I'm processing that right now.
Yeah.
I like that. That can. So what would you say? Now there's guys like one thing that I did, and one thing that Brooker's doing is we're both going back to school, and I just finished school for acupuncture, so I improved. I acquired another skill, and as a result of that, I'm now able to charge for another service, which makes me more valuable. Right? I can do multiple things, and I improved my value just through education. With the business, what would you do once these guys, you know, if you have a gym, you have trainers, each trainer that you have is kind of like a revenue stream. So the bigger you build up that trainer, the bigger the revenue stream for that trainer. And then, you know, it all comes cycling back in. With people that are self-employed, you know, it's just Brooker. Or if I were to go off on my own for whatever reason, what advice would you give to them as far as how to increase their value? So one thing that college coaches have is they have to latch on to a coach. A strength conditioning coach typically has to latch on to some kind of head coach in order to get a job elsewhere. And we kind of want to stop that cycle, and we want them to become self-sustaining and able to make them show their own value more so. How would you go about having an individual create value or to show value with that?
So let me, I'm looking for an example. But let's take, for example, your acupuncture part. You can say, I can do acupuncture. That's one thing. If you're a carpenter, you can say, I can cut boards. You know, I can cut boards. I believe that to get to the customer, if you do acupuncture or don't do acupuncture, I think is actually not relevant. What is relevant is I had pain, I don't have pain anymore. I wanted to make a step in my physical development, and that's what I need help for. So for example, when I talk about hypnosis, to me, hypnosis is just a toolkit. It's just one element. But what is important, they don't care about hypnosis, not hypnosis. They just want leaders to be better people. They want to be more successful in the way they operate. They want to understand how to make people execute their business plan. How do I do that? How do I speak to people? I have teams across the whole world. How do I deal with that? So I don't speak to them about the tools. I speak to them about what they should achieve. So when I'm asked to give an introduction to coaching, I ask the CEO, what keeps you awake at night? What's your problem? And we speak about his problem. And then when we speak about his problem, then I go to different areas to try to understand where his issues are. And of course, in many cases, this comes down to performance of people. But I've now not said, I can coach, I can do this, that, and the other. No, I'm speaking about, I'm trying to help you create value or resolve a problem you have. And I think that's, to me, the key point where to access. That's my view. Okay, I'm not saying that's the truth, but that's my view.
Right on. Well, James, thank you so much for hopping on this show. I actually have to run now. It's usually the other way around. Everyone else has to go. I want to ask you 1,000,001 more questions about everything. I would love to have you back on. This was amazing. We loved this.
Okay, great. Okay. Thanks, guys.
Thank
Have
you,
a good
James.
time. All the best. Take care.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers. Bye-bye.